Okay. So we're going to try and pick up sort of where we left off. But the thing I'm going to start with is actually a video, and it was Beth that pointed this out to me just the other day. And this is it. This is, if I can get it to play now, this is a Fibonacci spiral being created by bubbles from humpback whales during a feeding process. So if this will play, you'll see it being formed here. Let's see if it works. And then there they come up to feed. It's a pair of them. So do you remember we were talking about the Fibonacci series? So this is just one more example of it showing up in nature. And we did not have access to this until drone photography became a thing. So this was filmed from a drone, and I think they were studying the feeding patterns of humpback whales, and that's how they discovered that they make this spiral as they come up to eat. So that was, I thought you would enjoy that. That was pretty cool. It's almost done here. All right. Okay. Do it this way then. All right. So I'm calling this session 5 because, we did 4 sessions already. But as I've said before, you can just jump in where I am and it'll be okay. So what I am going to do, though, is I'm going to start with briefly reminding us of where we left off. So where we left off is, and I wish I could get this thing down. Oh, maybe. That's not much better. Oh, that is better. All right. Anyways, we were looking at the biblical creation accounts, and one of the things that we noted based on Genesis 1 particularly is that when God creates the universe and all the creatures within it, God says, and it is good. It is good. So here's where I want to start today. Come on. If creation is good, what happened? If the world was created good and humans are created very good, then what happened? And so in order to answer that question, we need to talk about sin. Now the definition I use of sin over at Luther is this. Sin is an attitude of selfishness or self-centeredness which leads to harmful and destructive acts towards others and the world. So the key is, it's not just the acts, because sometimes I think that's what people would say is sin. It's the actions that are wrong. But actually, it's the attitude that leads to the actions that is the real problem. And I want to make a distinction here between selfishness and self-centeredness. So selfishness is intentional in its impact on others. The person just doesn't care. So I'm going to take that thing from you, that toy or that whatever, land or whatever, and I don't care how it impacts you. That's a selfish attitude. So you're aware that maybe the other people aren't liking what you're doing, but you just don't care. That's selfish, okay? And that's contrasted with self-centeredness, which I says is unintentional in its impact on others. The person just isn't aware. So they're functioning out of themselves in a way that they're kind of oblivious to how they're impacting others. So they're not necessarily intentionally hurting others or making life hard for others or whatever, but it's still happening. So self-centeredness is like, my perspective is the correct one, and this is how I see the world, and it seems fine to me, but it might be actually hurting others, right? So there's kind of a difference between both, but what they have in common is the self is the center. So in selfishness, the self, doesn't care. It just takes what it wants or gets what it wants. And in self-centeredness, the person just isn't aware, but it's still what the self wants. So when we talk about sin in this way, we get away from the terminology that so many young people, if I ask them to define sin, they'll usually come up with something like breaking God's rules or something like that, right? And they're missing the whole point, which is it's something deeper than just a particular action, right? It's a problem that's deeper than that. So you can't deal with the surface issue if you're not dealing with the disease, right? So you might have some symptoms, and I would say the behavior that people exhibit when they're functioning out of self-centeredness or selfishness, or to put it another way, sinfulness, the behavior is sort of the symptom of the disease. The disease is this self-centeredness, this selfishness that so often drives what we do. So now, the last thing I want to say about this is the effects of sin are broken relationships with each other and ultimately with God. And so what we're doing here is we're bringing this whole conversation into the realm of relationships. Because, as you may remember from the first block of sessions here, that relationship is central to Christian faith. So I always try and come back to, well, how does relationship fit into this? Well, in the topic or in the area of discussing sin, where relationships comes in, is that these relationships are broken. And you can see that very clearly when we look at some of the stories in the Bible that illustrate sin. And the best example of that is Genesis 3. So if you want to take just a few moments to flip to Genesis 3 and just kind of skim through that story again to remind yourselves of all the elements, then we're going to talk about it. Those of you who are online, by the way, because I can't see all of you on the screen at this point because I'm sharing my screen, if you have a question or a comment, just unmute yourself and just speak up and we'll hear you, okay? So take a few moments to look at Genesis 3. All right. You may not have gotten the whole thing read, but hopefully you've sort of refreshed your memory as to what's going on in this story. So what we're going to do is we're going to dig a little deeper into Genesis 3. What is it telling us? And what we're going to try and do is get beyond just a literal reading of the story into its very multi-layered and very skillfully crafted picture of sin. So we've had 2 chapters illustrating creation of the world, and now we get the answer to the question, what happened? If the world was created good, what happened? So the first thing we're going to look at is, now this got out of order. Well, that's right. We'll do it this way. Temptation. So in this story, we have the introduction of temptation, right? And so the tempter, which in the story is portrayed as a serpent, right, is introducing what into the mind of Eve? He's introducing a couple of things, changing the way that Eve is thinking.
Doubt.
There's one, doubt. And what specifically is the doubt?
Did God really say that?
Did God really say? So in other words, you might doubt yourself. Did you hear correctly? Or you might doubt God. Did God say that? Why? Why would God say that? Right? So now doubt is introduced into the picture. So that's part of it, okay? And then there's one other thing. It also begins with the letter D. Deception? Close. I mean, this is certainly deception. But in terms of Eve's thinking, she looks at the fruit and she desires. She says, this is good to eat, and I get the knowledge of good and evil. So it's like, I want both of those things. So you have doubt about the goodness of God or about the command of God, and you have desire about something that you can sow. Oh, I see that it's going to go that way. I thought I had this all fixed out. All right. Well, okay. We'll talk about free will for a minute here. So this is also a story of free will. And free will is necessary for any relationship to mean anything. Because if a person is forced to say, for example, I love you, that doesn't mean as much as if. So the example I give at class often is I say, I can program my computer so that when I boot it up in the morning, the computer says, oh, Dennis, there you are. How nice to be working with you again. You're such a wonderful person and I love you so much. Okay? And would that make me feel good? Not really, because I know that I programmed it to say that. It had no choice. It just had to do that, right? Or conversely, a parent saying to a child, you go and say you're sorry to your brother or your sister or whoever because you did something to hurt them. And they don't really want to say it because they don't really, they're not really sorry, but they go and they say they're sorry just because you told them to. Well, is that really meaningful?
Well, when my kids were little, I got them to say thank you for the supper.
Yes.
Well, it's a lot nicer now when they say it.
That's right, because it's not programmed, so to speak. That's right. So in fact, using that example of saying the computer program to say, oh, I love you and you're so great to work with. If some human comes up to me, could be a child or a coworker or whatever, and says, oh, Dennis, it's so great to work with you, or it's so, I really appreciate who you are, and so on and so forth. And they do it without any motivation other than they just want to share it. In other words, they're not getting paid to do it, to say that. They're not being forced to say it. They're saying it of their own free will. That means a lot, right? So free will is necessary for a relationship to mean anything. So options must exist for free will to exist. And that explains why there's an option in the Garden of Eden. Some people would say, why did God even put that tree and that fruit in there in the first place? Well, because in order for humans to be able to exercise free will, there has to be a meaningful option. And so that's, I think, what's being portrayed in this story here. That humans have free will. We have the ability to choose for God or against God. We have the ability to say we want to remain in relationship with God, or we're going to go on our own. And without that free will, the relationship we have with God would not mean the same thing. You kind of follow? Yeah? Okay. So now, back to temptation. So the elements of doubt and desire are introduced into the picture, and there is definitely appeal to selfishness and self-centeredness. So, well, if you eat this fruit, then you will be like God. So there's the desire. You will know the difference. You will know, that you'll have knowledge of good and evil. And so here's the exact wording from my translation of, this is verse 4. First of all, the serpent says, you will not die. So contradicts what God said. Serpent says, you will not die. Well, that's a desire most people have, right? God knows that that when you eat of it, that is of the fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. All right. This, I think, is absolutely brilliant from the ancient writers. Because what it says is this: humans by nature like to be judges. We like to judge what is good, what is evil, what is right, what is wrong. And we want it according to our perspective. This is self-centeredness. Not necessarily selfishness, but self-centeredness. I know what's right, I know what's wrong. I know what's good, I know what's not. So we make ourselves the arbitrators of what is good and what is bad. And we can, history has proven that we can really get that wrong. We think what we're doing is a good thing, and then later on, in retrospect, we go, oh, that was a mistake. We should not have done that. And you could just look throughout. So, for example, beginning of World War II, Nazi Germany, it looks like a good thing because Germany is sort of getting back on its feet, and it's got some economic vitality. And the embarrassment of the end of World War I is being put behind them. The people feel good about themselves. They feel good about their nation. And it looks like a good thing. Well, except that, of course, where it ends up, it's not a good thing at all. But there were a lot of people, including clergy, at the beginning of the war, who supported what was going on. And they said, yeah, this is good. See? So this little line from the serpent, right, that you will know the difference between good and evil, right, I think is indicative of the fact that humans like to be the judges and decide who's good and who's bad too. That's another thing we do. Oh, that's a bad person. Oh, that's a good person. And where I see that getting really out of hand is in North American celebrity culture. Someone is good just because they're famous. That doesn't make somebody good, right? But you'll have lots of people who will just follow whatever this person says because they're famous. Well, that makes them good. No, that makes them famous is what it does. It doesn't make them good. But that's just another example, eh? All right? I'll be more specific. So there are many folks to this day that will still defend Michael Jackson, right? Who will say, no, he never did anything wrong. It's all stories, blah, blah, blah. Because, why? Because they like his music and because he was very famous and stuff like that. And so they decide on their own, Michael Jackson was a good guy, right? And yet, what other evidence has come out would suggest that no, he was flawed human being too, and he had lots of problems as well. So that's just one example. Like there are people who blindly say, oh, he's good or she's good or whatever, and So that's this idea of knowing good or evil. All right, now let's talk about the serpent for a minute, because I think the serpent is used for a very specific reason. Like you might ask the question, why is the serpent the agent of temptation in this story? So I'm just going to ask you, before I tell you sort of some of the things I've come up with, I want to see what you come up with. Why do you think the serpent is being used in Genesis 3 as the agent of temptation? Why not a lion or a giraffe or whatever? Why a serpent?
Serpents slither, you don't know where they're going.
Ah, very good. You don't know where they're going. It's the way they move, right? That they weave around, and you never quite know where they're coming from. And I think that's a picture of temptation. Because initially, the conversation begins, it's seemingly innocent, right? With a question. Like, the serpent isn't telling Eve anything. He's asking a question, right? He says, did God say you shall not eat of any tree of the garden? And it almost sounds like it's coming across as concern, right? You got to eat. So did God really say this? And then that gives the woman a chance to defend God. Oh, no, God didn't say that. God said we can eat from any tree except this one. Now comes the deception. Now comes the weave, right? Oh, yeah, well, that's because. But that's where it was heading all along, right? The serpent was heading there all along. Starts with what seems like an innocent conversation starter, but then very quickly comes from a different angle. So I think it is the movement of the serpent, not straightforward. It's deceitful in its movements.
Very, very sneaky.
Yeah, very, very sneaky. Here's the other reason. No, I'm not going to give it to you. I want to see if you can think of something else. Excuse me. So besides the movement, Eleanor?
Well, I'm thinking, I'm probably thinking of myself. I'm thinking most people are afraid of.
Okay, a lot of people are afraid of snakes.
Is fear introduced here anywhere?
Well, I think that it's
Dennis?
yes. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's Val. I think one of the things, I hate snakes, but I think one of the things about snakes is that they can camouflage themselves so you don't know where they are.
Okay.
And that part of it's where, to me, is where you can get tricked, because all of a sudden, out of the blue, that comes at you too,
Yeah.
That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good point, Val. So many of them are camouflaged by their coloring and stuff. Yep. All right.
Well, I heard a story one time about a woman, I don't know why it was a woman, but she brought a frozen snake home, and she liked it. And then the snake thawed out and bit her.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you knew I was a frozen snake when you brought me home.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, so that actually, you're getting, Eleanor, at the other thing I think that's going on here, and that is many snakes, not all, but many snakes are poisonous. So there's this idea of the serpent poisoning the relationship. So the relationship that's being poisoned is between who? Between God and the humans. The serpent is poisoning the relationship, right? And so it's a symbol of poisoned relationship. So for all those reasons, and probably more besides that we haven't figured out, that's why the serpent is used as the agent of temptation in this story. And what I'm pointing out to you here is that the ancient writers who put together the texts that became the book of Genesis had a deep understanding of human nature and how to describe it in a sort of a mythological sense, that is, using symbol, analogy, right? And I think all those things factor in here. Most people don't like snakes. Snakes are deceptive in their movements, and snakes, many of them, are poisonous. And if they're not poisonous, then they're constrictors, so they strangle you. So you could also say they strangle the relationship. You could say. Yeah.
Why did the snake come to Eve and not
That I think, unfortunately, the fact that Eve is the one that's approached first has been used to say that women were the cause of sin in the world and stuff like ridiculous stuff like that. Why in this story that's the case? I'm gonna suggest that maybe it has to do with the nurturing nature of Eve. That she would be concerned about making sure that there was food and stuff. Other than that, it's purely speculative. I don't know. But what's important to remember when we talk about this is that when Eve offers the fruit to Adam, what does he do?
He eats it.
Yeah, he doesn't even question. He goes, "Oh yeah, of course." And I'm going to say that maybe if it had been the other way around, if Adam had been tempted and then Eve was the one that he said, "Here, try this," Eve might have said, "Hold it, just a minute. I'm not sure that's a good idea." So it's almost like the man is not thinking, in a sense. He's just responding or whatever. It's hard to say. It's hard to say.
Well, he trusts.
Yeah, I guess he's trusting her. He's trusting whatever. Yeah.
But God came and confronted Adam, not Eve.
Yeah, initially, yeah. So that also tells you something, right? God does not see that Adam is somehow off the hook because he wasn't the first one to respond to the temptation. God sees. So, in fact, let's go to that. Let's go to. This once again got out of order. All right. Yes, Scott.
And to just go back to the, when this was all written down, wasn't it men that who wrote it, men or women?
It would have been men almost completely, though that does not mean, because we don't have records for sure, that there might not have been women involved in the shaping of some of these stories at some point, but primarily it would have been men. So yeah, they're not letting themselves off the hook, the men. All right, so relationships are broken. And how do we see that? Well, the first thing is that the humans hide from God. You don't hide from someone that you want to be with, right? And they also acknowledge that they're naked, which some people used to speculate that had to do with sort of an awakening of sexual desire. I think it's far simpler than that. We use clothes to hide things, right? Like, like we might want to hide a scar. We might want to hide a body that we don't like the shape of or whatever, right? And so clothes are a way of keeping private the parts of us that we don't want others to see. So in that sense, when Adam says he was naked, what he's really saying is, I have something to hide. There's something I don't want you to see, right? So he's aware now, like guilt is coming into the picture. He's aware they've done something wrong. And they've done something against God's will, and he's got something to hide. So he's literally hiding, and he's aware that he is naked, meaning he's exposed, right? His self-centeredness and selfishness has been exposed, all right? That's sort of how I read that. Then another way you see that relationships are broken in this story is that when confronted, Adam blames Eve. So he doesn't take responsibility for his own actions. He doesn't say, yeah, you know what, I was wrong, God, I'm sorry. He doesn't do that. He does what so many humans do, and that is just tries to pass the blame on to someone else. Oh, it's Eve. She gave me, right? And then what does Eve do? She blames the serpent, which by inference is blaming God, who created all creatures. So Eve is just saying, well, basically, she's kind of inferring, if you hadn't have created that serpent, I wouldn't have done that. So nobody is taking responsibility here, and now they're pitting themselves against each other. Adam is pitting himself against Eve. Eve is pitting herself against nature, and they're all pitting themselves against God, right? And so that's the signs of broken relationship that you see, right? And of course, this is human nature, and we still see this to this day. People blaming others for their problems, some of which may well have been created by themselves. But no, or blaming people for the choices they make. Well, if they hadn't have done that, then I wouldn't have done that. And on it goes, right? And that's all signs of broken relationships, right? And then, of course, they're banished from Eden and they experience pain in life. This is the consequence. So that's the ultimate sign of a broken relationship between God and the humans. They are no longer able to be with God in paradise. And remember that in Genesis chapter 2, God is portrayed as walking with the humans in the garden, right? In paradise, like there's an intimate relationship there, right? And remember, Genesis 2 has God forming Adam, with his hands out of the clay and then breathing into his nostrils the spirit, the breath of God. And then when Eve needs to be created again, it's like surgery, getting his hands in there. And so it's a very intimate picture of God with humans, right? Speaking with them, walking with them, interacting with them. But now they're banished from the garden, and they will experience pain in life. Now you didn't look at this, but what I want to point out is the very next story we get in Genesis, in chapter 4, is the story of Cain and Abel, right? Which is a story of fratricide, the murder of a brother. And seemingly for a very, low-level reason. Like, it doesn't seem like this is actually a very good reason to embark in violence of that nature, right? The one seems jealous of the attention the other is getting from God, and there's all kinds of theories as to what exactly is going on here. I think it suffices to say for now that what the writers or the compilers of the Bibles, when they put this story right next, they're saying, this is where the disobedience, the broken relationship, this is where it leads to death. So the serpent's lie, you will not die, is shown to be false here. Oh yeah, you will die, and it might be at the hands of your brother even, right? And that's, but notice in the story, if you remember the story well enough, God comes and asks Cain, where's your brother? And Abel answers, am I my brother's keeper? Once again, being dishonest with God, he knows full well where his brother is, dead in the dirt over there, right? But he's going to try and deflect the blame from himself. Well, I don't know where he is, So now we're trying to be deceitful with God, which is completely ironic, right? How can we be deceitful of God, who knows everything? And yet humans, do that. My favorite example of this is when people who maybe don't come to church very often or whatever, maybe they're here for a wedding or a funeral or whatever, and then they're in the building and then they swear. And then they immediately apologize to me, right? And it's as if like, it's not good to say those kind of words here. And, I want to say, well, maybe it's not good to say those kind of words anywhere. Why does this? But it's almost like, well, if I say those words elsewhere, God doesn't notice. But if I say them here, God notices. It's like, that's the human deception. That's, it's like, yeah. Anyways, am I my brother's keeper? Well, yes, you are, actually. You are your brother's keeper, which is the other flip side of that statement, right? Like the people who would be reading this, good Jewish people or hearing the story being told, would know that, yes, you are your brother's keeper because that's what God has required, right? Ever since the 10 Commandments were given and whatnot, you are your brother's keeper. So, all right. Now, the question then ends at this section. We might say, how will creation be restored to its good nature? So we've answered the question, if creation was good, what happened? Now the new question is, well, can or how will creation be restored to its original intended nature, its good nature? And that is what is answered with this: the arrival of Jesus. And you can read the whole of the Old Testament scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, you can read the whole of it as leading up to this, that God is attempting to restore the relationship with humans, choosing for himself a people that he will work through to restore that relationship. The giving of the Ten Commandments are a way of helping to restore this relationship. But ultimately, none of those things is completely satisfactory. The people of Israel keep drifting away from God, keep turning their backs on God, keep ignoring what God has asked them to do. And so a drastic measure needs to be taken, and the drastic measure is this: that God will now come in human form to bring the message of God directly to the people and to show them by the way that Jesus interacts how it is that God wants that relationship to be. So there's a need for God to send a Savior. And that's what Christians believe happened in Jesus. Okay, so now let me stop for a minute before I move on to the next thing and ask if you have any questions or comments about what we've covered up to this point.
One big word, manipulation.
Yep.
It's just one huge, terrific psychological drama. Really.
Yeah.
A lot of, it's a mind game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's that old saying, given long enough, you can justify anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So between the desire
Yeah.
and the doubt, well, just let me think through this.
Yeah.
I really want this, so yeah, we manipulate ourselves and we end up manipulating others.
Yeah.
And some people are, everybody's a little bit bad at it, and some people that are insecure are really bad at it.
Yeah.
I've encountered some, like, I love you, so I know you'll do this.
Yeah.
That's the simplest. And some others lead off that. I've seen parents do it and make people on a guilt trip. Like you said, are you genuine when you say I love you, or are you, but yeah, I've seen it in so many relationships where people end up doing something because they feel guilty because they've been manipulated.
So I want to build off that for a minute, Marianne. Okay, so manipulation is something that humans do to themselves, to one another, and never for a good purpose. Oh, I should say seldom. Maybe you could justify certain things, but it's a bad thing. So this answers the question as to why God doesn't just make humans behave, because it takes away their free will, and God would be manipulating, right? So God is, so you think of how Jesus interacts with people, right? He invites, but he never cajoles. He never tries to trick people into things or whatever. He just invites and tells the honest truth and so forth. He does so gently, but without apology. He'll just say it like it is. But there's no sense of manipulation in what Jesus is doing. Jesus is not trying to manipulate people, which is one of the reasons why I think Jesus will tell somebody who's just been healed or whatever, no, don't tell anyone, because he's not about manipulating. He's not about, oh, we better follow that guy because look what he can do, and maybe he can do that for us. That would be a form of manipulation. So I think that's a good aspect of our human experience that you've identified there, Marianne. Yeah. Anyone from online have a question or a comment? No? Going once? Going twice? Here we go. All right, so now we're going back to the creed because we looked at the beginning of the creed before, that first phrase about the first article, about God the Creator. But let me talk for a minute here about creeds in general. The word creed comes from the Latin word credo, which means I believe, which is why we call it the Apostles' Creed or whatever, because it begins with those words, I believe, right? But here's something that you may not know, that the literal meaning of credo is I give my heart, or I set my heart towards, right? It's a language of the heart. It's a profound expression of commitment, not simply a list of statements to which one gives intellectual assent. And this is really important, and we did cover this a little bit in the first block of sessions, and that is faith is not about intellectual assent only. Like it's not it's like here's a list of doctrines and I agree that they are accurate or whatever. It's far more than that. It has to be far more than that. It has to change the way you live. So when we look at the English definitions of creed, we find that sort of aspect to it. So Merriam-Webster Dictionary says a creed is a guiding principle or belief, belief or principle. So guiding what? Guiding how we live. So it's not just about what we think, but about how we live. And the Cambridge Dictionary says it's a set of beliefs that influences the way you live. So for the early Christians and the early creeds, they understood this implicitly. They understood that a creed was not just saying, yeah, that's what I think too, but it changes the way you live. It's like, this is what gives my life direction. This is what gives me the motivation to behave a certain way, and so on and so forth. And that's an important aspect of creed that we need to understand. What happened after the Protestant Reformation is that too much of faith became an intellectual exercise about here are the correct doctrines, follow the correct doctrines, believe the correct doctrines would be a better term, not even follow, believe the correct doctrines, and then you're good to go. Except that it has to be more than that. It has to involve the whole self. So if you remember in our first block of time, we talked about our holistic being, physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. All four aspects have to be involved in faith. If you only have the intellectual aspect involved, you're missing a bunch. So that's like saying, oh, I love all people, but then not acting in a loving way to other people. So and that's literally quoted in Scripture, right? You don't say, oh, I love my brother, but then don't help them out when they're hungry. Then that's a meaningless statement. So that's an example of that, all right? So a creed is I give my heart or I set my heart towards in its literal meaning. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a few passages from Scripture that talk about setting one's heart towards. So here are the four passages. I'm going to put them all up. No, I'll just put up the first three. So just take a moment. These are short, but just read them, and then I want you to just see what they're saying in general. Okay? 1 Samuel 7, 3 and 4. Now, for the sake of everyone hearing this, I will read the passage out, but follow along in your translation. It may be worded slightly different in your version. So this is 1 Samuel 7, 3 and 4. Then Samuel said to all the house of Israel, if you are returning to the Lord with all your heart, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashereth from among you, and direct your heart to the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So Israel put away the Baals and the Ashereth, and they served the Lord only. Now, do any of your translations use the phraseology, set your heart towards? Because some will in there. This is the RSV, so it doesn't say it that way. Does anyone have a version that says, set your heart towards?
Direct your heart.
Direct your heart, yeah, so it's, I mean, that's very similar. So, but you see, there's an example of, but when Samuel says, direct your heart or set your heart towards the Lord, that is illustrated by doing what? What did they do? They got rid of the idols, right? They're not only going to worship. So there's something they do. It's not just what they think, it's what they do. They're now going to get rid of the idols, and they're going to worship Yahweh alone. Okay? All right. Let's go to Psalm 62, verse 10. Now this is sort of a negative version. So rather than saying set your heart, it's saying don't set your heart towards something. All right? Here it is in my translation. Psalm 62, verse 10. Put no confidence in extortion, set no vain hopes on robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart on them. Right? So don't set your heart on getting more money, because that will lead to things like robbery and extortion. Right? Robbery and extortion. So when you set your heart towards the wrong thing, it can lead to behavior that is harmful and destructive or sinful, to use another terminology. Now, the next one comes from an apocryphal book, so most of you will not have this in your Bibles, but some of you will. Wisdom of Solomon, the Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 1, and I'll put it on the screen precisely because most of you don't have it. Set your mind on the Lord in goodness. Seek him with a sincere heart. So the Wisdom of Solomon begins by saying, this is where true wisdom comes from. You set your mind on the Lord in goodness for the right motivation, right? And seek God with a sincere heart. And so there's that idea of, now, for the ancient people, when they talked about heart, that was talking not just literally about the organ that pumps blood, but that was talking about that inner self, that core self that is responsible for motivation, responsible for our actions and so on and so forth, our will. So you could use the word, if you wanted to use a different word to substitute, you could use the word will in there. So set your will, or seek him with a sincere will, or whatever. So it's not just an emotional thing. That's what I'm trying to get at here. It's more than an emotional thing. It's involving the whole self. Because if you set your heart towards something, that influences the whole of you. Okay? All right, one more from the New Testament now. This is Luke 12, 29 to 31. And this is, again, a negative. It's what you shouldn't set your heart towards. Okay, and depending again on the translation, it'll read differently. Here's mine. And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be of anxious mind. For all the nations of the world seek these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, or set your heart on his kingdom, and these things will be yours as well. So Jesus is again saying, what do you set your heart towards? Well, if it's just food and drink, just the basics of life, first of all, be aware that God already knows that that's what you need. So, you know, you don't have to worry about those. Like he's telling them not to worry. You know, what you should be concerned about is the will of God. Right? So those are all examples that I wanted to use to illustrate this idea of setting your heart towards. And so in the creed, next time you say a creed in church, right, I want you to think about, how is this helping me set my heart towards God? Right? Yes, Scott.
In this reading, in what context is the term kingdom used as?
It would be like the kingdom of God, which is the realm of God, which is what Jesus is saying is he is ushering in. So it's not a future kingdom only, though there's a future aspect to it, right? But it's the functioning of grace and forgiveness and love and whatnot that Jesus is already starting to bring into the world. That's the kingdom. So when he talks about the kingdom, he's not talking about like a political entity at all. He's talking about a kingdom that says we recognize and we acknowledge that God is the supreme ruler. God is the one we should set our hearts towards, and that when we do that, that changes the way we interact with those around us, and we do this. So this is literally the beginning of the restoration of creation. So Jesus is breaking into this flawed world, right, with this new way of being, and that new way of being is described as the kingdom of God. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, because I know there's been some interpretation that when it's kingdom, it's more of a material touch kingdom,
Yeah.
the spiritual inner self type kingdom.
Oh, yeah. And there is, like, Luther himself was famous for his two kingdom theory, which he got from Augustine, and which did sort of divide the two realms. There was the spiritual realm, and then there was the political realm, or the realm of the world. And so in Augustine's writings known as the City of God, right, that's where you see this sort of these two kingdoms. So there is a sense in which it is a spiritual kingdom, right? But it manifests itself in very real ways, in the way that we interact with others, in the way that we treat others, and what we see as our motivation, what we place our hope in. That's how it manifests. So there is an interaction with this world, but its starting point is the spiritual realm, if that makes sense. Yeah.
In the passage, it talks about strive
Yes,
for the kingdom. So that means doing things.
that's right.
Working toward,
Yeah,
thinking about.
yeah. Striving gives you that sense of this perpetual effort, right? That we need to, like, this is, and I pointed this out, I think in a broadcaster article, the difference between conversion and just making disciples. Did I write that, or am I imagining that?
No, that's good, yeah.
But what Jesus asks his followers to do is to make disciples, which is a process, right? Like a disciple is a student who is continually learning, right? A convert, especially as it came to be understood in sort of American Christianity, was you accepted Jesus into your heart, you said the sinner's prayer, and then you were converted. But sometimes that was the end of it. Sort of like, well, I've done my thing now. And it's like, no. That's just the beginning. You got a whole life of striving ahead of you. Striving then to live out this life of faith, this creed, this what you set your heart towards. Yeah. Thanks, Ray.
Under the grace of God. There's that other aspect.
Yes.
I'm converted and I'm holier than thou type attitude I've seen come out of the States.
Well, it comes out of all kinds of places, yes. But, yeah, like...
I'm now better than...
Which-
it's a growing, you gotta
But I want you to think about this. I'm now better than. Guess what that is? That's reflective. Think back to Genesis 3, right? That's saying the knowledge of good and evil. Well, I've just identified who's good and who's bad. I'm good and you're not, right? Like it's the same temptation. And
Still sinful.
yeah, exactly. It's the same sin, just being displayed in slightly different ways. There's nothing new under the sun in terms of human behavior, really. I mean, we're the same as we've always been. Hopefully, though, as transformed by Christ, we are changing more and more into the new creation, right? Like that's what it says in 2 Corinthians. There's a passage that says, in Christ I am a new creation. Like we are starting to live out this new creation, this redeemed creation, this restoration of creation. And one of the problems that has happened with Christianity is this sort of separation of heaven as being this realm that happens only after we die. But in fact, this kingdom of heaven, right, which is another terminology that's used, kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God, right? This kingdom of heaven is something that is already part of our lives now. And we need to live our lives in such a way that that is being displayed to the world. So are we acting graciously? Are we acting lovingly? Are we acting with forgiveness and so on and so forth, which are all aspects of the way that God has graciously accepted us and now invited us to accept others. So yeah, this is all good. All good conversation. How are we doing for time? We only got a half hour left, so I better watch it here. Okay. Well, I got lots of material. If it spills over to the next week, it does. All right. So, a little more about creeds. The first formally acknowledged Christian creed is the Nicene Creed, which was formulated at the Council of Nicaea in 325. So, little background of the Council at Nicaea. Up until 310, the worst persecution of Christians had been taking place for about a decade and a half, called the Great Persecution. It was instituted by a emperor named Diocletian, and then carried on by his successor named Galerius. And eventually Galerius kind of officially ends at around 310. But Christianity is still an illegal religion. But they finally, what they realize is this idea that we can stamp out Christianity is not working. We've shed a lot of blood, and yet the Christians are still active. Then Constantine comes to power in 312, and a year later, at a wedding in Milan, he's there as emperor of the West, and at the same time, there's the emperor of the East, because at this point, the Roman Empire had been split into two halves, East and West. And they are both at this wedding in Milan, and they get talking about the situation with the Christians, and they say, you know what? We should issue an official statement of toleration that Christians can exist. So they issue what's known as the Edict of Milan. And what it says is Christianity is now a legal religion. It's no longer illegal. It's not the official religion of the empire. That comes much later. But it is a legal religion, no longer to be persecuted in any form. All right? So now, that's 313. So we're talking here just 12 years later. Constantine says, I'm calling all the bishops from all over the empire, and by this time, in 325, Constantine is actually united East and West. He is the sole emperor of all the Roman Empire. All right, and he says, one of the first acts he does as emperor of the whole empire is he says, I'm going to call this meeting. I want all the bishops from all across the empire to come to Nicaea, which is like a resort town on the coast of modern-day Turkey, okay? And I'm going to pay for your expenses to travel here, and I'm going to pay for your expenses while you are here at this meeting. And what we're going to try and do is unify Christianity, because Constantine saw that Christianity could be a good unifying force for the empire. because it existed all throughout the empire, and it was a religion then that could be functional in that way. But there were differences. One of the differences was, when do we celebrate Easter? And so that was actually the first reason for calling the meeting. You're going to all gather together, and you're going to figure out when you celebrate Easter. So they get there, but then it soon becomes something more. The meeting lasts for a year. It's a long meeting. It's a long council. And they get into discussion over the Trinity. So then, at the end of the council, they formulate this creed, and then they have a vote as to whether or not this creed is an acceptable definition or description of what Christians believe. And the vote is 300 to 3. So it's overwhelmingly accepted. And the creed establishes a unified understanding of the Trinity, and specifically of the nature of Jesus Christ. And this is the important thing, because at that time, there were debates going on as to how Jesus sort of fit into the Trinity and how Jesus related to God the Father and to the Holy Spirit. And was Jesus truly God? Was Jesus truly human? These were some of the questions that were being debated and so forth. The Nicene Creed establishes this unified understanding of the Trinity and establishes that Jesus is fully God and fully human in one person. And that's the creed that was accepted and formulated. But we're looking at the Apostles' Creed. So where did that come from? First of all, the Apostles' Creed is named that way because, not because the apostles wrote it, but because it agrees with apostolic teaching. And its original use, why it was formed in the first place, was a liturgical use. It was used in baptism. And that explains why the text uses "I believe" instead of "we believe." So this is how it worked in baptism. When a convert was about to be baptized, they had gone through a period of instruction known as catechism. They were catechumenates. And then when they had gone through that instruction, if they still desired to be a Christian, then they were baptized. And as part of the baptismal ceremony, and this is still reflected in what we do today, they would they would come down into the water, and then they would be asked by the bishop, "Do you believe in God?" And the answer is, "I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth." And then they were asked, "Do you believe in the Holy Spirit?" In Jesus Christ. And the answer would be, "I believe in Jesus Christ, God's only Son, our Lord, who was conceived," and so on and so forth. And then they were asked a third question, "Do you believe in the Holy Spirit?" And they would say, "I believe in the Holy Spirit." And then after they had answered those three questions, in the earliest forms, there were also 3 renunciations of evil. So there were sort of 3 declarations for God and 3 renunciations of evil and sin. And then you were baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So there was 3 sets of 3 that happened in the baptismal service. Well, in the baptismal service, you don't want long, complex answers. So it was a more simplified form of the material you have in the Nicene Creed. So it's the same content, just simplified. And that's why I use it at Luther rather than Nicene. Or the other creed that kind of had its roots in the Nicene Council, which is the Athanasian Creed, which if you look it up in the hymnal is a page and a half, which is essentially saying the same stuff, just in more detail. Anyways, so that's where the Apostles' Creed came from. It did not come into its final form, that is the form that we know it today, probably until about the 7th century. But it was very similar prior to that. And then it kind of got finally set with set wording by about the 6th or 7th century. But it was very similar kind of wording, and we know this because of the records of some of the early Christian writers. So that's where the Apostles' Creed comes from. So now, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a way of looking at the creed using this diagram. And so I'm using a triangle, and which is often a symbol of the Trinity or a version of triangle. But on this particular diagram, I'm going to give you some words and then I'll explain how this all works. So first of all, the creed expresses that there is one God and yet three persons of God. And this was a complex idea, philosophical idea, but it was important for the Christians to emphasize that they worship one God, that this was a monotheistic religion. They were not worshiping three gods. This was not a pantheon like the Roman or Greek gods had, or peoples had. Right? This is one God, but one God who manifests or exists in three persons. All right. So the first person of God is God the Father or God the Creator. Now, what I've put on the screen here is two different colors. I put Father in kind of a gold and Creator in white. That is to indicate a relational term versus a vocational term. So the relational word, of course, is Father. So there's a sense in which, and we dug into this a little bit, and we'll dig in a little more. Why do we call God Father? We certainly know why we call God Creator. That's that thing that we just covered a lot of. The second person of the Trinity, of course, is Jesus Christ, God's Son, our Savior. So the Son is the relational terminology, but Savior is the vocational. This is what Jesus does. He saves us, right? And then the third person of the Trinity, of course, is God the Spirit or God the Sustainer. And there's lots of other words that are used here. It could be comforter, could be companion. I'm using the word sustainer for now. But we're not done on this chart yet because I've got some words at the top. And the words are mystery and expansive. So when you are in the upper portion of this chart, you're dealing in the realm of mystery and expansiveness. And I'll explain this in more detail as we go through, okay? Then at the bottom of this chart are the words revealed and singular. And again, I'll explain what this means as we go through this. But I'm giving you the whole chart first of all, and then I'll explain. And we're not quite finished because at the very bottom, there's a timeline, which is partly being blocked here by that message. But you see the arrow there, which indicates past and future. So as you move from left to right, you're moving from something that happened in the past to ultimately something that will take place in the future. So this chart depicts the content of the Apostles' Creed in its entirety. And so we'll look at what I mean by this specifically. So Article 1, which we've already covered a little bit about, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. All right, so the relational term is Father. And why do we use that term? Because it is used to picture God as the one who provides, protects, supports, and mentors like a parent. So how does God provide? By giving us the world that we live in, which has all that we need for human life, right? Food and water. God protects, particularly in stories that we get out of the scriptures about God saving the people of Israel out of slavery, or protecting the people against their enemies, and so forth. God supports, that is, God is there to provide for God's people in a way that they feel like they're not alone, that they're being supported by God's presence, and God mentors or teaches. And where you see that most clearly, of course, is in the giving of the law, right? This is how you should live. This is a good way to live. No different than parents saying, you know what, that's not a good way to do things. You should do it this way. And we're doing it for the benefit of the child, not for our benefit, right? Like a parent, if their parent is teaching a child, they're teaching them for the benefit of the child. They're mentoring. Watch how mom does this. This is going to be a lot easier if you learn to do it this way. right? That's mentoring, right? So all these aspects are what are meant by the relational term father. So then the vocational, I got it right, okay. Vocational term creator indicates that God is responsible for all that we see around us, the visible, but also as well as that which we do not see or cannot see, that is the invisible. So in the Nicene Creed, it says literally, creator of all things visible and invisible. And for the ancient people, they had a really strong sense that there was a reality to the invisible world, or the spiritual realm, we might call it. Now, what we know is that there are things that we do not see that are definitely real, and one of them, for example, that we've been dealing with this last 5 years is viruses. We don't see them, but boy, they impact our world, right? So there's something now in that case, we could talk about that as a biological thing, but for the ancient peoples, that they kind of understood that there's stuff that we don't see that impacts our lives and impacts our world. And yet God is responsible for all that exists. That's what's meant by creator. Of all things visible and invisible. So we've kind of covered that a lot in the first block, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that, excuse me, unless someone has any questions or comments about that.
That last sentence.
You want me to go back there?
Kind of caught me. You said God is responsible. First, like you don't see these things. I agree, like the virus. And then you said God is responsible. How did you say that?
For all that exists.
The good, the bad, everything.
Well, in a sense, that which we call bad, which is again based on our limited knowledge of. But I mean, this is one of the problems when you're trying to understand the nature of God. There are things that happen in our world that are nobody's fault, and yet people are injured. Tornadoes, volcanoes, hurricanes, and stuff. And do we say that God created those? Well, God created the world that has weather systems that function that way, and sometimes it impacts us. And so we need to be careful that we don't talk about these things as God manipulating these things still to this point. Like there's a system that works. Now, what I could say is the more extreme weather events we've been having lately is partly related to human behavior.
I don't think that's God.
No.
God is God of love and giving,
Yeah.
and all is good, and we ruined it.
Yeah. So that would be. But now, for example, where do viruses fit into this? I'm not sure if we could identify that. In terms of is there something good about viruses? I suspect that there is something good about viruses that we don't understand. Certainly, there is good about the bacterium in our guts that we don't fully understand. Like there's things that we don't fully understand. The complexity of stuff is mind-boggling, and if we try and fit our understanding of how the world works into a spiritual package, sometimes you get rough edges. And that would be, so to say that God is responsible for all that exists, what I would say is, one way to put that is, all of the chemical and like all of the atoms that make this life possible is what God put into existence. And so some of those function in a way that are damaging, like a virus that can be damaging to humans, right? So does that mean God created the virus? Well, I don't think, see, again, we're thinking of things in terms of like a watchmaker. God is in there twiddling with things. And I think that's probably too narrow of an understanding. Plus, the other thing that we really are missing is that we are so trapped into thinking about this life is what there is. And there's nothing more than that. And yet, we get glimpses of it, the fact that there is a far bigger world or existence outside of this physical world that we understand. and maybe some of the good. Like a lot of people who have near-death experiences, right, will say that the experience that they have with, like the sense that they have is something more real than real. That's one of the terms they'll say. This is more real than real, bigger than they could picture. And the sense of love and acceptance and peace and stuff is deeply profound, so much so that most people who have had an NDE are changed radically. In fact, I heard one psychologists say, if I could affect the change in a person in 10 years of therapy that happens after one NDE, one near-death experience, I would be considered a great success. So there's something bigger, and I think part of our problem is that we're trying to sort this stuff out with limited information. It's like trying to put the puzzle together, but you don't have all the pieces. And so it's like, what is this a picture? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. Looks not good, this portion, but maybe it is in a way that we just don't even understand.
I just now thought of that, this is my Father's world,
Yep.
and though
The wrong seem off so strong. God is the ruler. Yeah. Yeah.
there,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, you just caught me off guard there with that.
Scott?
I think you were going back to the problems of the world. We get sucked into this idea that if it happens, it's God condemning us for something that
Yeah.
we've done. And all too often, I think we get sucked into that reason why it happened. There's
Yeah.
got to be something wrong with us.
Yeah.
We did, we screwed up.
Yeah. And God is punishing, or God is, or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And Jesus has a specific answer for that, because, and this is fascinating when you think about this. Jesus talks about a construction accident where they were building this tower and the tower falls over and a bunch of guys get killed. And Jesus says, that wasn't God punishing them. That was just an accident. And so part of our reality is we live in a world where accidents can happen.
Doesn't he also said, I think it's in Matthew, where destructive acts are part of the growth and the evolution of the world. These are the birth pains of...
Yeah, okay, the birth pains. Yeah, in one sense, there's maybe like that was Paul, by the way, who says that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Paul talks about the all of creation is groaning, as like a woman in childbirth, and there's a sense in which, in order for this new creation to actually be born, there is these pains that we are going through. Now, in Paul's case, he's talking about the persecution that the early Christians are facing. That's specifically his reference point.
Okay.
But it can be expanded to other things, I think, as well. And what you're getting a picture of very quickly here is, once you start getting into these deeper questions, you realize there's some stuff that just we don't have clear answers for. That's where faith comes in, right? It's like we don't need to understand all of this. What we do need to do is have trust that God is still in control, that God is still the one, that God is the ruler yet, right? Though the wrong seems off so strong, God is the ruler yet. That's the line from This Is My Father's World. But that's a faith statement, not a knowledge statement, right?
It's a mystery.
It is a mystery. So, you remember the words I had on there?
Yes.
Mystery and expansive. Well, let's get back to that, shall we? I'm going to move us along here a little bit, because we only got, there's no way we're going to. All right, here's what I want to point out. The second article, dealing with Jesus, is written in a precisely structured way to show the full divinity and full humanity of Jesus Christ. That's its whole purpose. When you think of the creed, it does not say anything about what Jesus teaches. It does not say anything about what he does, other than he's born, he dies, he rises again, and ascends into heaven. That's what it talks about. But that's because its whole intention is to say Jesus is fully God and fully human. And I will walk us through that. As with the Nicene Creed, this article was formulated to counteract heresies such as Arianism and Gnosticism. So this is the last thing we're going to be able to get into today, is these two heresies that the creed was developed to counteract. So first of all, let's look at Arianism. Arianism was a theological doctrine attributed to Arius of Alexandria. That's why it got its name. And Arius taught that Jesus was not fully God, but rather a creation of God. You might say a sub-God or something like that, but subservient to God the Father, or lesser than God the Father. And in one sense, that kind of, you could see how you could come up with that understanding, right? However, as the development of the Trinity, the theology behind the Trinity developed, it became really important to affirm that, no, Jesus has been there from the beginning. So, beginning of the Gospel of John gives us an example of that, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word is with God, and the Word was God. When? In the beginning. When is that? Creation. So Jesus has been there from the beginning. That's what that statement in 1 John is, or not 1 John, but in the Gospel of John, first chapter is saying. And that's directly counteracting or contradicting, because what Arius said is Jesus was created by God, thus could not be fully God. But what John says in the gospel is Jesus was there in the beginning, before creation. Thus Jesus was not created. See? That's what that's saying. All right. So that's Arianism in a very succinct and simple version thereof. Here's my favorite painting. It shows Nicholas of Myra slapping Arius of Alexandria at the Council of Nicaea. The debate got so heated that at least the tradition that's been handed down is that Nicholas literally got into a fight with Arius and slapped him or punched him. Now, which Nicholas is this? This is Saint Nicholas. This is Santa Claus. This is Santa Claus punching out a heretic. That's what you got here. So imagine, debates, theological debates that got so heated that they could develop into violence. And unfortunately, that's sometimes what happens when humans, once again, say, well, we're going to figure this out because we know good and evil. You maybe need a little humility. But anyways, that's Nicholas slapping Arius. All right, now let's move on to Gnosticism. Gnosticism taught that only the spiritual realm could be pure and that the physical realm was corrupt. Thus, they concluded that Jesus could not have been truly human, but he only appeared to be human. Because if he was human, he was automatically impure. He was automatically corrupt. Now, Gnostics, this is a very wide theology or philosophy. There was all kinds of different ways that Gnosticism was practiced and expressed. Some of the Gospels that show up later are Gnostic Gospels, and that's why they weren't included they were written in the 3rd and 4th centuries, and they were not included in the Bible because, they had this false idea. So now, remember I talked about invisible and visible? What they're really saying is the invisible realm, that is the spiritual realm, that's the only thing that could be pure. And that what humans are doing in this life is they're just preparing themselves for their entry into the spiritual realm. And they did it, Gnostics kind of went two extremes. They either became extreme ascetics, turning their backs on all human pleasures, like they would eat simply, they would live very simply, they would maybe sometimes even punish themselves, and so on and so forth, so that the flesh, this physical package, had as little influence on them as possible. That was one way. So they became extreme ascetics. The other extreme is that they became hedonists. They said, it doesn't matter what we do with this body, it's already corrupt, so we can just eat, drink, and be merry, and live our lives here, because what we do here doesn't matter. This is already a problem. This is already going to be destroyed. All that matters is the spiritual realm. And so you get this interesting divergence of how they responded to this idea. All right, so now, why is it important that Jesus is fully God and fully human? Jesus needs both natures because only as God can Jesus have the power to save us. And only as human can Jesus fully relate to us. Right? Otherwise, humans could say, well, God, you don't really understand what it's like to be human. You don't really understand the struggles we have. I mean, you're God after all. Everything is great for you, but it's hard for us humans. But then when Jesus comes in the flesh, comes as human, he is one that shared our experience, including our suffering, the hardships, the betrayals, the broken relationships. I mean, these are all things that Jesus experiences. So he can relate to us fully. But also, as God, he has the power to save us. Thus, Jesus can promise to his followers that we will be joined with him in the resurrection. But he can't make that promise if he's only human. Right? But he can make that promise if he is God.
I'm always so amazed that the creator of the universe became a baby and completely helpless.
Yep.
It just blows me away.
Yep. And that is the amazing message of the incarnation, or a message of Christmas. That the creator of the universe became vulnerable. Completely vulnerable. Yeah. And thus can relate to us completely. Right? So this is why, for the early Christians, it was essential to affirm both the full humanity and full divinity of Jesus. Because without both of those natures, something was missing. And so that's why they strongly believed this. All right, so now we're at our time, so last questions or comments. Ray.
Maybe it means that we need to experience ourselves as vulnerable, to be fully open to Jesus
Yeah.
as being both human and spiritual.
Yeah, what Ray was saying is that it's important for humans maybe to be vulnerable to experience fully what it means to be connected with Christ. And I think there is an aspect of that vulnerability that is part of our Christian faith. I do think that that's an important aspect. Vulnerability and humility, those two things I see kind of going side by side. So, all right, those of you online, I want to make sure you have a chance to ask any questions or make any comments here at the end. We're at the end of our time, so. Any questions? Actually, you know what I can do? I can do this. I can stop the share. Then I can see some of you. So now you can just wave at me if you have a question. Or you can just wave at me. I mean, whatever you want to do. No? All right, well, thank you for hanging. Oh, there, Marie. Rose, that's Rose. Yep, go ahead, Rose.
So where in the Bible would I find the accident thing that you talked about? Where Jesus said it was just an accident?
Oh.
Where would I find that? I can't remember crossing anywhere.
I can't tell you the exact passage off the top of my head, but Rose, I'll send it in an email to everyone. Okay, so I'll include it in the email. Yeah, I think it's the Gospel of
Thank
Luke,
you.
but I can't remember what chapter and verse. Okay, anyone else?
Thank you.
No? All right, well, let's close with a prayer. Gracious God, we thank you that you are our creator, that you have provided for us, you've protected us, you've mentored us, and that you've come among us as Jesus, vulnerable, humble, and fully in relationship with us. Help us to respond to Jesus in a way that is with our whole lives and not just intellectually agreeing to the idea. And we ask that you be with each and every one of us in the coming days. You would keep us safe and keep us healthy. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so next week, what we're going to get into is we're going to be looking at the second article using that chart a little further, and that's what we'll be doing next week. So, until then, take care, and I'll see you sometime soon.